Okay, let's bring that down. You're ready to make a painting tonight. Come aboard the pirate ship painting, and we're gonna make a beautiful painting by Vincent van Gogh. And here's our bravest crew member, Edie the Brave Lion. Welcome everyone to my studio. My name's Michael Markowsky. This is our daughter Edie. And tonight we're going to make a painting by another one of my favorite artists in celebration of Halloween. And we just raced home from trick-or-treating and had a lot of fun. Our very first Halloween that we went trick-or-treating with together. I'm so excited. What a good sport. A little bit scared with all of the creepy kids running around, but... And I don't think we even had much candy, just lots of fun. So anyway, thank you very much, love.
Happy Halloween! Hi, Daddy.
So, we are going to get to the painting here. We're going to paint one of my favorite paintings of all time here. It's been a bit of a race to get set up here. I think I'm set up here. Okay, cool. And I just replaced the image that was on the Dropbox, so we'll check that out here. This is the painting we're about to recreate. This is skull of a skeleton with a, or head of a skeleton with a burning cigarette. I've also read, excuse me, skull and a skeleton with a burning cigarette. Obviously, the original is in Dutch, so the translation can differ slightly. So we're let's a little discombobulated because also this is a very unusual time for me to be painting. Before we jump right into making this painting, I want to let you know that there's an outline for the painting, and all of it exists in a Dropbox folder. There's a link down in the description below. Click that. You'll see all of these other paintings that we've already done. Tons and tons of different artwork. We already did an entire week dedicated to Vincent van Gogh, or Vincent van Gogh. And inside that folder, if you clicked on that, you would see all these other paintings, some of his most famous paintings of all time. But we're going to continue scrolling down this list all the way to here, number 87. You click in this folder, you'll see these three files. You'll see the outline and the original artwork, and actually there's two versions of the outline. One's a JPEG, one's a PDF. Maybe before we launch too much further as well, I want to let you know that there's a private Facebook group just for people like yourself. You can join the group, upload your version of today's painting, and just like we did yesterday, I take a bunch of the artwork off there and we take a look at it, and I give some feedback and a lot of congratulations, because anybody who's going to the trouble of making a painting, I think, deserves some recognition. And despite what you might think, I guarantee you they're much better than you think they are. So they're certainly better than anyone who isn't brave enough to even begin making a painting. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of this painting and Vincent van Gogh for anyone who's new to, who's never seen me before and wants to understand a little bit. Actually, before I jump into that, so I mentioned that there's an outline on the Dropbox. I'm going to show you how to transfer it onto the canvas here. So I'm going to play this video, and then I'll talk over it as it's playing. So you can see that I've printed out that outline on just a regular photocopy paper, And you can use your inkjet printer, laser jet printer. There's nothing special about it whatsoever. I mean, you can do this with a magazine. You can do it with any image. You can just photocopy an image and then use this process to transfer it onto a canvas. The only difference is I've helped simplify this by doing the outlines for you, because sometimes it can be a little bit tricky getting those outlines there and making the decision as to where the lines go. So anyway, you see I just tape it down, and then I'm going to use some carbon paper. There's graphite paper, carbon paper, they're the same thing. And you can see this single sheet has been used maybe 20, 30 times. It's been around for a little while. And it's not going to leave the darkest lines after you've done it many, many times, but it's still going to leave a line. And really that's all we need anyway, right? Unless you were using this for a finished artwork. So pretty straightforward. You put it under there, go over these lines. I'm not sure at this moment exactly how many lines I need. I think you can also just see how I moved this carbon paper down a little bit so that I could get some of these lines that are right down on the bottom. And when it's all done, you can peel the sheet off. And again, I'm going to save it, and we can reuse it again, right? So now that we've got that image on here, we can take this and you can recycle it or paint over it. Sometimes they're useful to keep around that you can do a little test on, and you don't have to worry about doing it on the actual painting itself. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put down a warm yellow ground, and this is just warm yellow right out of the tube. This once was in a tube, but this is leftover paint that instead of throwing tubes of paint out, I just cut them open, use a spatula, scoop out the paint, and you can see I've got jars of these full of paint that would otherwise have just gone into the garbage, landfill, or down the drain. Okay, now I'm going to take some water and put a little bit of water on here and mix it up. So what I'm about to do here, this is, I'm making the foundational layer of my painting. The imprimatur, as the Italians called it, who were really the first to do this. Now traditionally they would make a brown, a rusty red color. And you could do that here, absolutely. This is just kind of my own trademark sort of thing here. It's really just me cutting a corner. But I also really like the effect that this warm yellow has. So I just mix it into the water, and then I'm just going to brush it over here really quickly. All right, we're going to paint over every single little bit of this yellow, which, you know, the question always becomes like, okay, so if we're going to paint over it, why are we doing it in the first place? And the answer is, yes, we're going to paint over it, but that doesn't mean we can't see it, or that we might not even be aware that we see it. We might not see any yellow just straight ahead, but our eyes, our brain processes it. It knows there's something there, but it doesn't really, it's not really aware of it. You know, it's the same sort of thing like, you know, if you make pasta and you put an egg in the pasta to make it, it's not like when you're eating the pasta, you're like, this tastes like egg. It's obviously it's there. You had to put it in there to make it. I think I don't know if there's another way of making pasta. Or you could make, I guess. We've made, what is that? Pasta with veggie pasta using. What vegetable is that? My wife has done it a few times, and I started doing it myself because it's pretty healthy. And once you get enough sauce on it, it doesn't really matter what's actually in there. It could be shoelaces, and it's like, oh, this is delicious. So, zucchini pasta. So, oh, look at this. Look at all the people watching here. There's Paula, Gail, Deborah, Donna, Sandra. Awesome. Good. Okay. So I'm just going to clean that brush. You saw that I wiped the excess paint off that brush before I put it in my water, so that means that water is, I mean, it looks yellow, but it's relatively clean. I mean, I'm not going to drink it, but it's clean enough that I've never ever had to change my water, even if I've been painting for 8 hours, which I've done a few times here. I'm not going to be painting for 8 hours tonight. My goal is to try to get this done in about 2.5 hours at max. So I'm going to let this dry for a moment. While it's drying, let's put some paint on the palette, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about Van Gogh's biography, as really as it relates to this painting. Because when we did the whole week on Vincent van Gogh, I kind of went pretty in detail about different periods of his life. So if you're really interested in learning more about him, I'm not going to go over the same material a second time. But we'll talk a little bit about what he was up to and what his life was like at this particular point in time. Now, all of my paints, I fit inside of a shoebox. I think that's important, because if you've got a lot of paint, finding a place for it is a problem. Like, I mean, I've got a lot of paint in behind me, and it takes up shelves worth of paint, and I don't use a lot of it these days because I've increasingly just used this very, very simple palette. The simple palette I'm using today is called a split primary palette. And what that means is, instead of having one yellow, one red, and one blue, we've got 2 yellows, 2 reds, and 2 blues. And what's the difference between the 2 yellows, for instance, is that one is warm and one is cool, as you can see up here. If you want to get the exact paints that I'm using, you can buy them. There's links in the description below. You don't have to use this brand. I'm not sponsored by this brand, even though we've talked about me being a brand ambassador for them, but there's nothing. The only thing I would want is just cheap free paint or something, right? I don't want to be promoting anybody's other stuff, right? But anyway, that's a whole other discussion. So we got the paint on the palette, and you might think, why are we even bothering putting all this paint on the palette? Because this painting, isn't it just going to be black and kind of an off-white? Maybe, but to get all those colors, we're going to need pretty much all these paints. Like, I don't know exactly the process we'll use, but off the top of my head, the only colors that I might not use might be the cool yellow and the cool red. I'm pretty sure we'll use almost all the other colors, but, you know, anyway. So I'm going to move that out of the way. Let's put our painting back in place. And then while this is still a little bit wet, I could blow dry it and speed on to the next thing here. But I want to talk a little bit about Van Gogh. So Van Gogh, obviously one of the most famous artists of all time. I'm not alone in enjoying the work of Van Gogh. Born 1853, dies in 1890. The work that we're looking at today was made in, we're not exactly sure, but somewhere around 1885 to 1886. So this is, you know, you're like, oh wow, that's just right before he died. You know, 4.5 years before he died. And so you might think like, wow, this is right near the end of his painting career. That's true, but it's also very close to the very beginning of his painting career. At this time in his life, Van Gogh has only really been painting for a couple of years, maybe 2 or 3 years at tops. I mean, he made some drawings and paintings like kids often do when they're younger, but it's not until this point in his life where he's now like, I think this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to dedicate myself for about 5 years, and I'm going to make as much as I possibly can, and if nothing happens after that, then I'm going to try something else. So he's all in, he's trying to make this happen, and he's studying, he's living in Antwerp, Belgium at this time, and he's studying art at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts. which he later says was boring and taught him nothing. And I'll tell you, funnily enough, there are a lot of art students will tell you the same thing. I've also had times where when I graduated art school, thought like, did I learn anything? What a waste of time. It's not really until you start teaching people stuff and you're like, oh, because people would be like, oh, I didn't know there was such thing as warm and cool colors. And you're like, oh, yeah, I guess that's not common knowledge. Maybe I did pick up one or two things over those 4 years. At this, Van Gogh doesn't go to like the whole, also art school was very different at that time. I'm not sure exactly how long he was there. I don't think he studied that long. He was a bit of a temperamental person, and it wouldn't have surprised me if he left under some, cloud of something. Anyway, so, you can read a lot of the stuff on here, but basically, there's a sort of dispute as to, did he paint this artwork while he was in a class, or was it outside of class? If we look at the this painting is in the collection of the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, which is an incredible museum. If you've ever been to Amsterdam, it's obviously got to be on your list of places to go, as well as the Rijksmuseum, which is also maybe one of the top 5 museums in the entire world. So Amsterdam, there's a lot more to Amsterdam than, the hash bars, if that's what you're thinking. Whenever I tell people I've been to Amsterdam, I'm like, oh, yeah, I know why you went there. I'm like, no, I went there to go check out Van Gogh because it is amazing. Also, there's Anne Frank's museum or former house. There's a lot of cool stuff, and it's a beautiful city. So, like here, so they own the painting. It was given by, not Picasso, Vincent to his brother Theo, who was also an art dealer and tried to sell, not Picasso, Vincent's paintings unsuccessfully. But, here's what they say. That, no, this painting was done, although the artists would make paintings of skeletons during, as part of the curriculum, he did not do this. He must have done it after class or between classes or some other time. I don't know how they know that. Van Gogh did write a lot of letters. If you really get into Van Gogh, a great way to spend your time would be to read the letters of Vincent van Gogh. Now, he wrote thousands and thousands of letters, like at least one a day, especially toward around this period as we go forward, to his brother, often asking for money, but also updating him as to how the progress of these paintings were. So it's potentially possible that he talks about the situation regarding this painting. I'm not sure. But, that's one of the, because Vincent was such a prolific letter writer, it's one of the ways that collectors use to authenticate his paintings, because they could say, look, he's describing this painting in his letters. This is the painting, obviously. Now, not all of the paintings that he wrote about have been found or have been authenticated, because, of course, if the painting hasn't been found, that's the place that the forgers go, and they're like, oh, let's find the painting that we see he talks about, but it's not in a major museum, and we can't find it. It's not in the catalog raisonné. And, of course, there's like 10 copies of that painting that exist. Which one is the real one? It becomes harder and harder to identify them, because people were making fraudulent copies of Vincent van Gogh paintings. About 15 years after he died, the first ones start popping up. Because even though Van Gogh died, famously without selling a painting, he knew some of the great artists of the time, like Paul Gauguin, who was his friend, and who Vincent cut his ear off literally hours after Gauguin and Van Gogh had this famous argument, and Gauguin leaves the house they were sharing together. And Gauguin becomes like a hugely famous artist, very, very famous during the, shortly after, he's already pretty well known, but after Van Gogh dies, Gauguin becomes like one of the most famous living artists in France at the time, and that connection to Vincent helps Vincent's paintings become more well-known, because obviously Gauguin respected Vincent. So if Gauguin, this master, is a fan of Vincent, well then let's take another look at Vincent's art. Let me see. There's lots of... I think all these are in the description below, but I just wanted really quickly, before we get into the painting, so I'll move on from talking a little bit about the work, a few things that you know, again, we're not exactly sure what inspired this painting. If it wasn't done as an exercise in class, then a few other things that we know he was aware of were artists like Félicien Rops. And Rops was like a really well-known kind of caricature artist and illustrator during this time, who also did these very like grim illustrations of ghouls and ghosts. You know, he would also be a very appropriate artist to study on Halloween. So like he's obsessed with these images of like skeletons. Come on, look at all this. There's lots of stuff here to go through. Come on, where are these? There's definitely a few that are not appropriate for children. So here's here we go. Here's like a bunch of his pretty famous images: Satan sowing tares, and you know, these like devilish kind of characters, these human sacrifices. So these are the kind of things that Van Gogh, we know that he was aware of him. How much he knew? I think he had some of his images in a magazine that they found in Van Gogh's apartment, or the little rooming house that he was living after he died. And then this is another artist that Van Gogh was also aware of, and again, we're not exactly sure how much, but you know, this other fellow, Hercules Seegers, you know, here's one. I love this skull. So I just think that's a gorgeous image. Like, what a cool print this was. And this is in the collection. There's one in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam and in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Anyway, very, very, some great resources if you're really interested in finding some of the connections between Van Gogh and what he was looking at the time and what might have inspired this painting. Now there's lots more to talk about as we work on it, because we're going to be painting it for the next couple hours, and so I'll tell some stories as we go. If you're just watching me for the very first time and you're wondering, if you're skeptical about how this painting is going to turn out, you could certainly just jump right to the very end. Maybe you've already done that and you're like, oh, actually it turned out pretty good, I'm going to follow him and paint. So welcome back. So how are we going to paint this painting? Now that this is dry, I've blabbed enough for it to dry, let's just sort of take a look at the image. Now, okay. What I'm looking for is I'm acting like a detective, trying to look at this image and see if I can work my way backwards to find out how it was originally created. And there's a really great essay by, what's his name? It's called The Scene of the Crime, and it's basically this art historian, art writer, writes about how, you know, the viewer of an artwork is like a detective at a scene of a crime, like Columbo, which I watch Columbo every single night before bed these days. And, you know, you're sort of working your way back from the clues to how the murderer executed this crime, and then who was the murderer. In this case, we know that it was Van Gogh. So, you know, I guess what I'm looking at right off the top here is this weird, kind of, looks like this is a Prussian blue, which is kind of a cooler dark blue, and I'm just curious if by looking at that I could tell if that existed anywhere underneath. It's definitely under, because we can see the colors blending there, but I don't know to what extent. You know, I bet you, because I see it in these areas where there happen to be lines, and I'd be willing to bet you that what he's done here is painted this as an outline and then painted everything over top of it, and it's mixing with the wet white paint, or the off-white. I bet you that's what he's done here. So, since this is the master study, let's follow what Van Gogh did and replicate this exact process. So, I'm just looking for a brush that I can use, and let's start diving in here. Just making sure. Okay, so let's just zoom right into this area here. And so the color we want is this kind of Prussian blue, which is a dark, cold color. And so what I'm going to take is my cold blue and some warm red. And that warm red is really going to darken this color down. And at least at this moment right now, it's gone kind of like a purpley color. It's a pretty unappealing purple color because it has very little saturation. If I wanted a really nice, beautiful, bright purple, I would mix my cool red with my warm blue, and I would get a beautiful purple. Here, I'm mixing a color that these colors are almost directly across from the color wheel, so they're really kind of existing very close to what we call the neutral core, the center here. So I'm going to now actually take a bit of cool yellow and mix that in here, and that's going to take this color that existed right around here and pull it right towards the middle. And right in the middle there, the color just basically evaporates, and now all we have is basically a gray. Okay, so now I've got this really, really dark color. And I could use this right now if I wanted, but what I want a little bit more of a bluish quality to this color. So I'm actually going to take a bit of warm blue and a bit of cold blue, mix these up, and then mix my color into this dark color. And the reason I put a little bit of warm blue in there is the color that I'm looking for sort of exists like a cobalt blue, a little bit in between here. Okay. So, and you know what? Now that I look at it, that color's got a bit of a teal quality too. So I'm going to put a bit of more cool yellow in there. And I'm not sure how well it turns out on camera here, but I think we're pretty close. I think we're pretty close. Okay. Either way, we're about to paint over almost all of it, but I just thought it might be interesting to think about this a little bit as how we want to get that initial color. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around and I'm going to paint this just kind of like what he would have done. And you can see I'm using a pretty big brush. You know, it's maybe about the little bit bigger than my fingernail, or sorry, a little bit more narrow than my pinky fingernail. So I suspect, you know, that he was looking at a real skull and a skeleton, you know, that was probably, like at most art schools, including the one I teach at, we have lots of skeletons in the closet, you know, that are hanging around, that are used for our anatomy classes and such. And they're on like little stands, and you can wheel them around. these teeth. I'm probably just going to go right through here. Let's make sure this is in focus. I think this cigarette that is, you know, the kind of part of the iconic aspect of this painting, I'm pretty confident that that is like the last mark on this. I think he did that very quickly at the very end. Potentially he might not have been happy with this and was just like, I'm just going to throw a little cigarette on there and just be done with it. This is a waste. This is a failed painting. I think that's probably what he was thinking. He'd probably be quite shocked if he was alive today and was like, what? This is become a iconic painting of mine? I wanted to throw it in the garbage, and my brother said, no, I'll take it. Give it to me. And it stayed in Van Gogh's family really up until it was donated to the Van Gogh Museum. It was sort of passed down to various different relatives and kind of, I think, friends of the family. Like, Vincent obviously died without having any children, but his brother Theo did have a child, I think a couple, and you may have heard just a few, well, I guess probably about 10 years ago, the last remaining descendant of Theo Van Gogh was assassinated. He was a filmmaker and was murdered by an extremist, and because I'm sure, what was his name? I think it might have been Theo Van Gogh, the man that was murdered. And he was sort of like an outspoken artists' rights kind of person, and an extremist murdered him for speaking about the Prophet Muhammad and for ridiculing the Prophet Muhammad. Okay. Anyway, let's, now that I've got all these lines on here, and you can see I've just painted them really quickly. It doesn't really matter if they're all in the exact right places. We can move all that stuff around as we continue to paint on it. I just want to get that initial blast of color on here. So maybe the next thing I'm going to do is now start kind of darkening in. And I'm going to use the same color. And I'm going kind of quickly. And I'm going to paint right around everything. Oh, there's some stuff that I didn't want to paint over, and I just painted over it, so that's okay. We'll bring it back. And I think, like I imagine Van Gogh did, I'm going to paint right over that cigarette, because I don't think it was there when he originally, you know, when he did his initial part of the painting, so we're just like him, we're going to put that in at the very, very end of the painting. You can see I'm not really concerned about making the most even surface. I don't care if there's a little bit of yellow showing through here. Okay. Cool. And so this is basically like if we were in a class and we were painting this image, we would be doing something very similar. If we were painting the skull from real life, this is basically what we would be doing. We would sketch it out. Now, I think it's probably quite likely that he would have done this without any pencil and would have just been literally going with the brush. And so if this, I'm sure this has been x-rayed, it wouldn't surprise me if we saw, let's say, an eye right here, or a nose right here, or, you know, bones moved in different places, because it all gets painted. And so you're sort of, what an artist would do is paint and kind of work things out, and like, oh no, I'm gonna move the skull here, right? So you can make extra little marks there because it's all gonna get painted, right? No worries. Now we're not gonna paint the dark area around here just yet, because maybe we want to move some things around. We're not sure yet. We don't know, right? So now let's create our the color we're going to use for the skull. Just going to wash this brush because I'm not going to be using that color for a little while here. Okay, now this is an interesting color, so I'm going to take a sip of tea. Okay, and so what we're going to do is we're going to mix a warm brown next, and this brown has a lot of yellow in it and a little bit, it's kind of, yeah, so I'm going to use a little bit. Let's start with a small brush, because it's always nice before you go nuts making a color. See if you can make it first, and then if you're happy with it, then you can double and triple it. Same sort of thing if you're making a bunch of muffins and you're like, okay, I've never used this recipe before. And we need to make 1,000 muffins. Okay, so let's just put 20 gallons of milk into this big cauldron, and we're gonna put 40 bags of flour and 400, you know, it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. You've never used the recipe before. Let's see if we can make one muffin that tastes good, and then we'll double the recipe. So let's just hold on. So, okay, so let's do the same thing before we mix 2 tubes of paint, and it's just, we're like, oh, I did the wrong thing, right? So let's follow, let's pump the brakes for a second here. So to start, we're going to use some of this warm yellow. Okay, I'm going to take some warm red, and let's mix this together. You saw there was a little bit of cool blue in there. I don't mind that. And let's just bring this up here so you can see. Now that's actually, you know, that's not too far off. Part of that cold blue has turned this a little bit more brown as opposed to orange. So I'm a little... in terms of a demonstration, that kind of sucks because this would have gone orange. So this is basically the effect of adding a little bit of blue into the color. Warm blue is what I would put in there. But obviously you could see cold blue is totally fine, because you're talking like 2 or 3 little grains of salt in your soup. It's going to change it, but not radically, because we don't want it to be radically different. Now, if we look down into places like this, you can see it's like this yellow ochre kind of thing, right? And so it's a little bit of it's a little bit darker. I'm not gonna, I think this is gonna be fine for right now. I think this will be fine for right now. So, but we want it to be a little bit more white, obviously. So let's now mix this color with some white and just see what we get. Okay, so this looks okay, but it still looks, a little bit too light and airy and happy. I think we do want a little bit more blue. So let's take a bit more warm blue and just mix it into this color and then bring that into here. So just a little bit more blue kind of takes the... Ooh, look at this. That brush just broke. Okay. And this is one I tried to fix too. I think, of course, just after the Amazon return window closed probably too, right? So let's take this color. Maybe, you know what? I'm going to take a bit of this dark color that I made here earlier. This is my darkest color that I can make. That was with warm red. I used warm red, cool blue, and a bit of cool yellow to make that really dark color. And if I add it to this color, it turns into a gray. If I add it to the white, it turns gray. So basically right now, instead of just modifying this brown with white, and when we add white to a color, it's called tinting the color. And instead of, if I added this dark color to the to this brown, right, that would be called adding shade, right? Instead, by adding gray, it's a tone, right? So if we look at this, I think we're pretty close, right? Not maybe exact. Well, I think that this color is in a few places, but we're going to be making it darker and lighter as we go. And we're going to mix this color a bunch of times throughout this painting, but this is kind of a nice neutral mid color where it's not, you know, if we want to make it obviously much more bright, like in some of these areas, we just add white to it. If we want it to get much darker, like some of these areas, then we can just keep on adding more and more of our dark color. Okay. So let's zoom back out for a little bit and let's bring our painting back. And we could start, so this is sort of like doing a portrait, right? What we're going to do is start looking for areas that have this color in it, right? And this sort of mid-value and I would say like a lot of the skeleton has this color. That's why it's a good idea to mix the mid color, the mid value, as opposed to going right to the darkest or the lightest. We've already kind of got our darkest with these lines here, right? Let's keep on going here. So, you know, I'd be willing to put money down that this is, we're following pretty much what he would have done, because this is pretty much what anyone learns in art school even to this day. This is a typical sort of exercise. And again, so whether he did this in class or outside of class, we'll probably never know. But especially if he did it in class, then we're not too far off from the actual process here. So at this point, it's really, we're looking for the areas of light and dark, and I'm also being very loose with the way that I paint this. I'm not really concerned about making it super accurate. And if you were a student in my class and you were sitting here really going very slow, I'd say, come on. I would stand right behind you and I'd say, okay, I want to see all of that paint in the next 3 minutes or something. To which you'd go, oh, what? And you'd be all angry at me, and I'd be like, come on, let's do it. I'm going to stay here. And if you don't do it, I'm going to pick up your brush and I'm going to do it for you. And you'd be like, you'd be giving me the evil eye. And because we don't want it, we could care less about making this perfect, especially, well, I mean, at this stage anyway. We just want to get as much paint on here as quickly as possible. Obviously, Vincent is painting with oil paints, which is a different technique and different processes, but you know, is you know, ultimate, because we have a bunch of paint that would be mixing with the other colors on the canvas, because it's all wet on wet. It's a little bit different than what we're doing. So we're not going to get these colors mixing as nicely as Van Gogh did, but you're going to see it. It's going to turn out, I think, pretty good. So let's go back here, and I think we've done a pretty good job with this color that we had. So let's take a bit more of it, and this time I'm going to go a little bit darker. So rather than adding more white to it, I'm just going to take this color and go darker. So now, instead of adding a tint, which is adding white to this color, and instead of adding a tone, which is adding gray, so adding a little bit of this and white, I'm really just I'm adding some of this and creating a shade. So I'm going to go down from the gray to a little bit darker here. And now I'm starting to try to locate some of these shadows. And I'm not at my darkest point yet, but I can put some of this in the dark areas. I'm just going to put that over there lightly. And I strongly recommend that you try to keep up and not get bogged down and making things perfect at this stage. Allow yourself to be a little bit looser. All right, let's get a bit more of this paint on here. Okay. Maybe I'll just zoom back out a bit so you can see that whole canvas a little bit more. Okay, so now I'm going to look into these bones here and see if I can get some of the darker areas. Donna says, you sound like such a meanie in class. I'm sure there's probably a few who would agree. But I think one of the things that's really surprising is I'm pretty sure that every time when you move just a little bit faster than you feel comfortable, you end up doing work that usually surprises you. You know, it's the same sort of thing with like going to the gym and working out. And after I got in this really bad bicycle accident a few years ago, and I as part of my recovery, I had to go through physiotherapy and kinesiologist. I went to a gym and was working with someone to get, and you know, they're like, I'm like, oh, I'm getting tired. And like, come on, give me 5 more reps. And you're like, oh my goodness, or I can't. And you do it, and you're like, oh, actually, you're right. I could do it. It just was a bit of a pain, but yeah, I could do it. And that's how you get stronger, right? And this is also how you get better. Right? If that's why people really go to art school. You can learn all this stuff online right now, obviously, right? But when you're in school, you have someone who's like kicking you in the butt and come on, let's go, let's keep on going. Stop being lazy. Stop telling me you can't do it. I know you can do it. I've seen you do it before. Let's keep it up. And then at the end, you're like, yeah, well, I guess they were right. I technically can do it, but okay. So now I'm taking just a moment. Now I've gotten a bunch of that paint in, and I'm just now defining a few things and looking back and just seeing, okay, before I continue on and do my highlights, let's just do another little pass at all of this. Something here. I think I painted out some of these bones, so that'll come back. I'm not gonna spend too much time really worrying about how perfect it is, because this is not intended to be a anatomy lesson. I could do that at some other time. I just want to kind of show you a little bit about how he probably painted this painting. Okay, so now let's go do the opposite. So I'm going to take this color again. I think we're going to do another gray. So if I mix this color in, and now I'm just going to take a lot more white. So now I take this brighter white, and you can see it's kind of a bit of this grayish. I guess it's not too far off what we had there before, so maybe what I'll do, I'm just going to actually wipe my brush off. I'm not going to clean it, but I'm going to take some white, and I'm just going to, let's do this next to here, and just take this color and mix it into some white separately. That way, rather than if I keep on trying to add white to this batch, it's just going to drive me crazy, because I'm going to have to put so much white in there. So instead, I'm mixing it off to the side, and with my brush kind of clean, you know, then you can get a very, very subtle color. But anyway, so and that actually might be a little bit too far in that direction. So I'm going to take a bit of that original brown. Let's put this in here, because I think it just needs to be not quite as intense. As I say that, nothing changes. Okay, let's take a bit more of it and just do this to this right here. So I just want a little bit of a gray. That color is pretty intense. The only area where I'd really want to use that might be in a few areas down here. So there we go. That's a little closer to the color I want. I will put some highlights on, but I want to save that till very close to the end. You can see I'm still using a relatively big brush, right? It's the same, you know, just a little bit thinner than my pinky finger. I haven't gone in and started using a tiny little brush yet. I would be saving that till very close to the very end. If I mean, you could do the whole painting with a big brush like this. There was, put that back in place. I did take a little bit more of, remember this one I said was a little bit too bright? I'm just taking a bit of it now and just going, okay, that needs to be brightened up. This needs to be brightened up. So like we're looking for all these little highlights and things and just trying to describe the light and dark areas here, because it's gonna get quite much darker here shortly here, because basically what we've done is we started with the outlines, right? We kind of figured, okay, we're just drawing the general shape. We get the composition in place. And then we mixed a mid value, right? That middle gray, brownish gray, and then we painted in. And then we went and we darkened. So then what we're doing is we're sort of kind of like starting in the middle, and then now we're expanding out to the contrasts. Right, so that's why I didn't want to go too white, because if once I put that there, then if that highlight is that, then I have to go even more white, which is, you know, how much whiter can you get than just white right out of the tube, right? And I also haven't gone pitch black yet, because what if I do that and I still need to go darker? Well, how am I going to make something darker than the darkest color I have? So I'm expanding and slowly defining what these shapes are. And okay. Okay, let's put Getting there. Great question. Sandra says, I think one thing that I struggle with is where to mix paints on the palette when space is low without confusing the warm and cool colors. Ah, okay. So you mean when the palette starts filling up with paint and it starts getting a little confusing? I can see what you mean. I'm trying to think of how I do it. What would I say to that? We must keep swimming. Yeah, I don't know. I think I don't know. I guess I don't think about it. Things just sort of, I just use wherever the room I have on my palette to paint, and because you'll see sometimes I might be mixing an orange or something way down here just because that's the only available space. I mean, you could also just get more palettes. I mean, often if I'm doing a large project, I might have I just take like the lids from salads. You know, those big plastic bins of spinach and mixed greens, and just you can take those and they're great for painting on because they usually have kind of a beveled edge, and so if the paint won't spill off or if it's really watery, that is a pretty good solution, right? It might help if you put a piece of white paper underneath or literally paint the bottom, because if it's clear and it's sitting on a gray or a green table or something, then that can be really confusing if you're trying to mix that color, and that's why it's nice if you have like a white palette to mix on. A very interesting question. Gail says, mine is a disaster. Donna says, I have a 7-pound weight on my head. No swimming for me. Great to see you even just joining us today, Donna. I really appreciate that. And it's I'm sure you'll be back on your feet painting along with us sooner than later, so we're looking forward to that and seeing what you create after having this experience. I'd be interested to know, like, you know, is there an image that you just can't wait to paint because you've been unable to do that for the past few weeks? Okay, so what should we do next? I think we want to go now the opposite direction, right? So we went, remember we're talking about expanding from the center. So now let's go darker again. Right, so I think we need to mix this color again because it's kind of gone. So let's now just take some of our warm yellow, a bit of warm red. Maybe that's a bit too much, so we'll just put it to the side. And I don't mind if I get it kind of gooey and mix it in with some of these other colors, especially for a painting like we're doing today. Maybe if I was going for something really clean, and you know, then I might really want something that is, you know, a palette that is where the colors are maybe a little bit more isolated. But I generally, especially once the painting gets going, I like it when it gets a little bit kind of, the colors mix in a little bit. So maybe that's, you know, when you're talking, Sandra, about that being frustrating, I think for me that's a thing that I really embrace. I really like that. So I'm actually just going to take this color. This might be a little bit too bold here. I think it should be a little bit more diluted. But, you know, I'm just going to use it anyway because I like my paintings to have lots of color, right? So I'm just going to put a little bit in here, and I can always hide it or get rid of it later. But I'm really inspired by seeing these colors in here, and I'm just like, you know what? I kind of want a bit of that too. It's just... So, I'm just going to throw a little bit around here. You can just pretend I didn't say anything and turn a blind eye. And but, you know, you could certainly add other colors and go really nuts. Like, I mean, you don't. This doesn't have to be gray. There could be fluorescent pinks and stuff in here. So, I just want a little bit of extra. And maybe a lot of this gets covered up by the end of the painting. But yeah, I'm sure this is going to cause the painting to look a little bit different by the end, and people will be like, "Oh, he made a mistake." But I like it, and I don't think I should have to apologize for it. So okay. I said I was going to make this darker, right? So, and it looks like I'm out of my dark color too. So let's just take a bunch of this warm red and cool blue and mix it again. And again, you can see I didn't bother cleaning my brush because I know I'm going to mix it into this color anyway. So let's just let it get nice and dark. And right, it's Halloween. The rest of the world is out running around, getting drunk and, you know, falling all over themselves, and here we are sitting around making a painting off of some weirdo on the computer. So we should have a little bit of fun, right? Let's allow yourself, like, don't be so hard on yourself. Let's take some of this red. I'm gonna make, because I want to make more of this dark color. So I'm making just a big old mix of it. And so it looks like this big batch of purple, of like a ugly purple. So now I'm going to take some of my cool yellow and I mix this in here, and it's probably not coming across on camera, but now this looks to me like a very, very dark gray. Maybe still a little on the purplish side, so I could put a bit more cool yellow in here. Now that's gray. That, I mean, like basically about as dark as gray can go before it's black. So, and if we'll see that, you know, if we just add some white to it, we would see that it's very much a gray. So how am I doing with time? I think at this stage I might now actually just start painting the background. I wasn't going to do that just yet, but since I've made this big mixture, let's because this will also kind of force me to finish the painting in a reasonable amount of time. I'm going to take this dark color. I don't think I'm going to use any black in today's painting. I rarely do anyway, but I'm just going to put this dark color. And let's look at this. You could use a black if you really want. I don't know. I don't think I need it. So I'm using a pretty big brush. You know, now this is bigger than my pinky finger because I want to get a lot of paint in really quickly. Okay. That's good. I think that's everything I wanted to do with that layer. If I wanted to get even darker, I could go over this layer of paint a second time and it'll get darker. If I really want, I could also add black to this color. But I would, you know, I think dropping your paintbrush in the middle of the painting is a great idea. Okay. So, I think now I'm going to start going down to some smaller brushes because I'm pretty happy with where everything is, where my general color shapes are in place. There's a few things missing, like, you know, I can see outline, like these bones down here aren't there because that's on the back side of the rib cage. So we'll get there. But the majority, like the big solid things are there. So now we can start kind of fine-tuning things. And this is my favorite part of making a painting. I really like the begin. I mean, I love what we just did. That's a lot of fun. It's because and if you do it like the way I did it, where it's sort of fast and you're not really overthinking it, and you're just sort of like bum 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 bum, and like, oh, it's in the wrong place. That's okay. I'll fix it later. Bum 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 ba da dum. Then I think you'll really enjoy that part as well. Because if you're sitting there like, oh, I don't know if I don't know. That's like, that's not fun. That sounds like a really bad time, right? So try to, you know, get to this point fast, and maybe faster than feels comfortable. What on earth is... Oh, that's the broken brush. Okay, let me just... I was like, what is this one doing covered with paint sitting on my table? Oh, it's because it's a broken brush. Okay. So, I do think, looking at my painting right now, it is very brown. I think I need to go much more gray next. So, let's, I think I'm going to mix, let's just mix a gray. Let's just maybe put that here and put some white. Right, and that's a bit more of a purpley gray, so let's take a bit of yellow and put that in. Well, now it's a bit of a greenish gray. Although I don't mind that, actually. If we mix it in, especially into the darker color, that yellow will dissipate. And there we go. Now we've got our actual proper gray. And like I always say, like when you see this transformation happening for the very first time, it is like alchemy, right? Like you can, and we've talked about before, that's why a lot of artists, Renaissance artists, Leonardo da Vinci included, were pretty sure, like, because if you could take this mud, paint is just sort of colored mud, and if you could mix it together and you can create the illusion of replicate someone's face on a flat surface, or create a space that you could walk into, it's like, wow, that's magic. So it doesn't seem that far off to think, well, if I can make a person's face appear on a canvas and that person dies, and yet we have their face preserved forever for generations to come, just like they were when they were young, it's not too far off to think maybe we could mix a few of these substances together and make gold, or create diamonds, or the fountain of youth. Maybe it's just a matter of mixing the right thing, and we can drink it and we'll live forever. It sounds absurd to us now, but 500 years ago, you know, if you look at the if you were living 500 years ago and you walked into Leonardo's studio and you saw the Mona Lisa, you'd be like, what, you're telling me that you just, and it wasn't even just tubes of paint, he'd be grinding up dead bugs and like powders from Afghanistan that were carried to Italy on boats and camels. It looks like a witch mixing up this stuff in a cauldron, and you'd be like, you're telling me you took those 6 bugs, you crushed them up in a pestle and mortar, you mixed them with this linseed oil, right, which you can use for cooking, and you do all this stuff, and then you make the Mona Lisa. Like I can't imagine what it would. He would have seemed like a magician, or not just a magician, like, because that's illusion. I used to want to be a magician when I was a kid, but I mean like a sorcerer or a witch, right? So, and Leonardo, who was friends with Galileo, you know, they lived in the same few blocks. Galileo, he went to jail for suggesting that the Earth revolved around the sun, right? This is the era that we're living in, so it's not too far off to suggest, you know, that you could be arousing the suspicion of some people who might think you're doing some pretty weird things in your studio. Anyway, long tangent, but let's come back to the painting here and think about how we want to use this gray. Like, let's say we take some of that and mix it into here. And get like a bit more of a neutral color. So not quite as intensely brown. And then we can kind of tone some of this bright color. Remember I was saying, like, oh, this color I'm going to put in here, I really like color. Well, I might end up deleting a bunch of it after all, but, you know, it's why not experiment with it, see what it looks like. Okay, I think I need to go a little bit darker. So if that's my gray, let's just take a little bit of my dark color and add it to here. And now I just get a much darker gray. I think some of this is going to need to go even darker, for sure. Again, part of me, I start kind of wanting to really make this really nice and get the anatomy, nail that, but I think just in the interests of getting this episode done in a timely fashion, like, I would love to be able to, if I could finish this in the next hour or less, I'd be very happy with myself. So I might, you'll have to forgive me if you tuned in hoping I was going to show you how to paint the anatomy of the human skull here. So you see, like, I go over some of the same areas multiple times, and sometimes I brighten and darken, and I think for a beginner artist that might feel like, oh, that's a big mistake, I thought I finished that area and moved on. That's not really how it works. You're often kind of going back and forth and moving and adjusting things, as some people might call pushing paint around, right? That's usually said as like a derogatory thing, that you're just like sort of floundering, but sorry, I'm just trying to get. But all those layers of paint, I think, are really gorgeous. They slowly add up together to create a really cool image. Okay, so now let's just keep on going here. I'm going to take, again, more of my darker color and this brown. Let's mix that in. So now we're just going to get a much darker gray. Oh, and you know, I was going to say I was going to go to a smaller brush, so let's actually do that, because I think I'm at that point now where I want to start really refining things a little bit more. I think I still need to go even darker here. So this is not my darkest color, but it's getting closer and closer there, right? We got a really dark gray. Okay. You know, probably another thing that starts happening, you know, as I start getting into these details, I do probably get much more quiet, because now it's sort of a different part of my brain that is required to do this type of stuff, right? It's less kind of just wild and throwing paint around, and now we're starting to kind of involves, I think, a increased amount of concentration, I would say. The other thing, too, which is weird, is painting someone else's anatomy study is a little bit weird, because I'm not entirely convinced that he did the best job here with this anatomy study, so I don't know if I would take it as gospel that he's got everything in the right place. He's done a pretty good job. But Van Gogh was never, you know, obsessed with the, like, getting proportions perfect, right? That, in fact, that's one of the things that we really like about Van Gogh, is just how loose many of his paintings are. Okay. So now we need to kind of bridge this gap between that really dark color and something a little bit lighter. So let's get more of this dark color in here. Maybe just a bit more gray. Oh, I think I want more of this brown now. And I do, you know, I'm actually now thinking I want to do a bit of a wash for some of this, because otherwise things are just going to get kind of very grayish. And what I like is, because we can't, it's really hard to replicate some of the effects he's getting with the oil paint here. So I'm mixing my dark colors directly into this brown to try to get this really dark brown. So I'm going to mix a bit of a bigger mix of my, I need some more warm yellow. Just going to mix some more of this brown really quickly. In fact, I can, since this palette is kind of dirty, I can just mix that color, that warm yellow, right in here, and I get kind of the brown that I want. And I'm just going to take my dark color. See, I had that big mixture, and it's mostly gone. So let's just mix this right in here. Really dark, gross, kind of dark brown. Oh, and let's use that small brush again. So I think, you know what, I'm going to add glazing fluid now. So this is my satin glazing fluid, or matte glazing fluid, right? It's not shiny. I do have gloss glazing fluid, but I generally don't use it. And I'm just going to mix this. I put a lot of it, and I'm mixing it into here. It's going to make it a little bit more transparent. So now I can paint with it, and I'll still see some of the paint that's underneath. So I can paint it into some of these darker areas here without painting everything over. So what I like about this is it's like I paint over some of the existing dark or light areas, and it modifies them, but they don't disappear. It's just like, so some of that darker areas just kind of goes darker. Yeah, I don't know, it's just like a really fun way of applying color. And it's also very easy to blend with it too. So if you didn't like it, you could just take a rag and wipe a bunch of it away. Dry brush over areas too. Okay, I'm gonna do this again. I'm gonna take my glazing fluid, and this time I'm just gonna wipe off some of the excess paint, not too much, but so there's still some of it on here, and just then go right into this glazing fluid, and then I can very delicately now darken some areas. Almost to the point where it's so subtle, it's like, am I making any effect at all? And you might not be if it's so subtle, but I love doing this kind of thing because I always talk about this as being kind of the timid painter's secret tool. Because if you're really scared of putting a big bold color somewhere, you can do it with a glaze and hardly sort of affect things, like just barely noticeably affect the painting. And it also just gives it this weird, kind of slightly dirty kind of look, especially if you go over like lighter colors like white. It just sort of, it's a very easy way to make them look like they've been modified in some way. little bit of my darker glaze. Now, I think I need to make a little bit more of my dark color. So I need some more cool blue. Cool blue and warm red. Cool yellow. And you know what? I think just for the sake of speed, should I put black in there? Maybe I'm just gonna put, well, you know what? No. I was gonna put black in there, but I thought, you know what, let's just... I always like showing people we can do all of this without using a drip of black. This would be probably dark enough. So, you know, in my mind, I'm just thinking, like, okay, how long should we, much longer should I work on this? I think I'm going to try to wrap up in about 15 minutes. Small brush with just, this is my darkest color. You could use black again, but I think it's nice to know that we can do it without it. It's a little hard to see what's actually happening in here on my monitor. It's so dark, so I can't. I'm sort of just fudging a little bit. Let's go to back to one of my dark grays. My brown. Because these teeth, this whole area is kind of... Oh, I think I want to put this dark. I realize this is kind of got a bit of a greenish hue there, so going to glaze over top of this with... Actually, I should wait for that to dry before I try to glaze over there. We can also glaze and lighten some things up, so maybe I'm just going to take a bit of this gray and glaze. There's this little area. Now it looks white, but it'll dry much more clear. Oops, it needs white and brown. So really, I'm just like doing a lot of little fine tuning here and just looking for little highlights. Adding a bit of white now. Going back over these teeth, which I outlined before, but bringing them back out. So now what I'm doing is I'm taking my brush, even though it's dirty, I'm dipping it into the white and I'm allowing it to mix a little bit. So this is, I'm trying to kind of replicate in some small way what like a oil painter is doing, allowing some of that paint that's under there to kind of come through. Get this line on the forehead, and so I'm just dipping in. Remember, this is my glaze I put in here a while ago. Right, it's kind of just this big muddy greenish gray. Might be a little intense, so let's just take... I'm not happy with it. I could just wipe that away. That didn't turn out really well, so I'm just going to dip my rag in a little bit of water here and just wipe that off. And the glaze again. Not sure what that line is. Okay, I think what I'll do is just blow dry this, and then I might do another little bit of dark glaze over just to darken a few things selectively. So I'm going to mute the microphone. Okay, so again, all this paint, it's all just goopy and wet, and I'm just going to use that as part of my glaze. Maybe get a bit of my dark color back on there. But if there's any areas that just need a little bit more of a push towards the dark side, go even darker. Okay, I'm getting the feeling I'm just fiddling here, and I think that usually to me that means it's like, okay, I think we could probably wrap it up. Okay, so we are missing a major part of this painting, of course, is the cigarette. And some people have seen this painting as sort of the poster for why you should quit smoking cigarettes. Van Gogh was a cigarette smoker. He was, I don't know if you would say he was I don't know how many cigarettes he smoked, but he was known to smoke, and he was smoking the day he died. So it's not an anti-smoking thing. It's more, I think it's more of a joke. This painting, I think he made this, and he was like, I'm not really happy with it. I'm just gonna throw a cigarette in there and just be done with it. Kind of like just painting a quick mustache on something, right? Be like, I was just like kind of almost graffitiing his own painting. And then it sort of took on a life of its own afterwards. So let's add this cigarette here. And I'm going to take a bit of glazing fluid to do this. I mean, you could do it as a dry brush. There's two ways. Maybe we can do part of it as a dry brush. I need a bigger brush that's not wet. So, and I'm not going to take just pure white. I'm going to take a little bit of my white that I've kind of mixed a bit, and then take some white. Maybe just get it a little bit more muddy, a little tiny bit gray. So we'll do this as a dry brush. So again, like a dry brush, you can literally take that brush and just take off some of that initial paint that's on there. And you can wipe it on your hand or on a rag. And then, let's see, whereabouts is it starting? If we go right down from the nose, it's here and out. Right, so if we look really carefully at this image, as we've painted it, you could see how like rough it is. We can see the texture of the canvas here. Right, so we can do a few more. And maybe closer to where the mouth is. He's gone over a little bit darker and darkened it. That's why I was going to take now a little bit of my glazing fluid and just mix this into here. Right, it's almost like now a little bit too bright, right? So in fact, because it's a little bit too bright, let's just take my brush and just rub it into this darker paint. Now this is very dry, but I can just go over top of this. So it just barely picked up a little bit of pigment on there, right? Now, I do want to... Mine is sort of overlapped those lips, or the teeth a bit, so I'm just going to come back and paint that a bit back on top there, so... But you can see, like, this is really one of the very last things. So much so that it looks like he painted and there's like paint got smudged over here. Okay, and then we see just this little hint of smoke. So again, I'm just going to take my brush, take that paint off, go back to this kind of white that I had here, and just dry brush it, right? Just wiping a bit off on my hand. And then, right, kind of just, you can put as much on, like right there is almost a little bit much, right? Might be, if anything, what I might want to do is again take this dry paint, like it's very kind of sticky at this point now, and just wipe some off. Just want to widen it a bit. Okay. And now we need some yellow. That yellow rather is just some of my warm, or some of my cool yellow. All right, so I'm going to take that cool yellow and a bit of white. Now it looks a little bit green. I was hoping to get away with this without having to put some more cool yellow on here. Because it's definitely... I don't think that's... Yeah. If I'm going to do this one last little mark, let's do it kind of right. As much as it drives me nuts to... Let's just take a bit of this. Barely need any, obviously. Just put a bit on the palette. Okay, and let's just do that again. It is kind of the signature part of this painting, so let's get it right. So let's take some white and some cool yellow. Maybe still needs a bit more white here. Just slightly more opaque. Okay, so let's just zoom out. I am a little tempted to put that kind of teal Prussian phthalo blue back up there, but I might just leave it. This feels... It's funny, on the screen, this brown looks much darker, or much more intense, more saturated than it does in person. So I'm a little... like I'm looking at this and I go like, oh, I want that to be much, much more subtle. And then I look at my painting and I go, but it is subtle. So I think I can... I mean, as I look at it right now, I'm just seeing little things that could be adjusted, which drives me crazy. So I think I just want to take a bit of my dark color, come around here. I'm pretty happy with the way I did the smoke, so I think I'll just leave that. Final finishing touches here. I think you know, it's not an anatomy lesson. I just want to try to recreate this painting. So there's little things with the way that I painted the skull that I'm not happy with, but I don't think the majority of people would ever notice. So, okay. Let's see. Right, head of a skeleton with a burning cigarette, 1885 to 86 circa. And just a little bit over 2 hours from beginning to end. That was a fun one to do. I'm happy we did it, even though it's, you know, late at night for many of you on the East Coast. I saw left a little bit early, which is totally understandable. It's midnight where you are. Thanks for joining me, everyone, for celebrating Halloween with me. Wherever you are on planet Earth, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Stay safe. There's a lot of people driving around after having a few too many drinks while they're celebrating tonight. So if you want to go out and have a few drinks, maybe think about taking a cab home or whatever, another alternative form of transportation, or be careful while you're walking around, and party safely tonight. On Tuesday, we're going to be painting a painting by Rembrandt. Really, arguably the greatest portrait painter of all time. One of my favorite, and I'm like I'm going out on a limb saying that he was a great artist there. So we're going to look at Rembrandt, and then I can't even remember what's happening on Thursday. Thursday we're painting Guy Fawkes, who, well, we'll talk about all that. You're looking forward to just getting and turning the computer off. So thanks everyone for joining me. If you liked this, please like, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. If you want to leave a donation, there's a PayPal link in the description below. You can also send a check or e-transfer. You can use the super chat function here on YouTube. You can contact me through my Facebook or email, which is on my website. All those links are in the description below. Thank you, everyone. Happy Halloween, and we shall see you in a few days. Okay? Take care. Good night, everyone.